The unexpected assignment. The rain was falling in a soft mist over New Kyoto Station, its lights glowing in the haze like distant stars. Sergeant Daniel Cross stood under the flickering sign of a tea house, his coat pulled tight against the chill, wondering why his commander had called him here instead of the security office. He was not the kind of man to ask questions, but the whole thing felt strange. When the door slid open, a tall officer stepped out, his face hidden by the shadow of his cap, and handed Daniel a sealed data chip. "Your assignment is inside," the officer said quietly, glancing around as if afraid to be seen, then walked away without another word. Daniel inserted the chip into his wristcom and read the brief message. "Guard the alien Geisha, codename Ayara, until buyer arrives. No questions asked." That was it. No background, no reason, no official stamp from the station authority. He frowned, because jobs without details usually meant trouble. Still, orders were orders, and he had a reputation for finishing what he started. The meeting point was a small room above the tea house, lit by paper lanterns that swayed gently in the recycled air. There she was, sitting perfectly still on a cushion, her posture elegant, her eyes half closed. Ayara was unlike anything Daniel had seen in his years as a soldier. Her skin shimmered faintly under the lantern light, not pale, not dark, but something between. Like moonlight, touching silver, her hair fell in soft waves down her back, each strand catching light like fine glass. She wore a robe of deep blue silk, the fabric embroidered with tiny glowing threads that seemed alive when she looked up. Her gaze met his with a calm, almost knowing smile. "You are here to guard me," she said, her voice smooth like flowing water. Daniel nodded, unsure if she was asking or stating a fact. "I am told you are trustworthy," she added, then lowered her eyes again. The way she spoke made Daniel feel like this was not just a simple escort mission. He shifted uneasily, scanning the room for threats, a habit he could not turn off. Outside, the hum of the station was constant, the sound of cargo ships unloading, traders shouting, and maglev trams sliding along their rails. But beneath that noise, Daniel noticed something else, a sense of being watched. Every time he glanced toward the doorway or the thin paper walls, shadows shifted. He could not tell if it was his imagination or real danger. In his gut, he knew it was the latter. Ayara rose gracefully, her robe trailing behind her as she stepped. "Closer, we should not stay here," she whispered, her eyes flicking toward the window. Daniel opened his mouth to ask why, but before he could speak, a sound like a faint click came from the hallway. He had heard that sound before, the safety latch of a compact energy pistol. Without thinking, he moved in front of Ayara, drawing his own sidearm. The door slid open just enough for a shadow to move inside. Daniel fired once, the flash lighting up the small room. The intruder fell back into the hallway with a cry, footsteps retreating fast. Ayara did not flinch. She only watched him with those unreadable eyes. "They will keep coming," she said softly, as if stating a simple fact. Daniel's mind raced. Who were they? And why did they want her? He decided questions could wait. Right now, his job was to keep her alive until the buyer showed up. He motioned for her to follow and led her out the back door of the tea house into the narrow maintenance corridor. The corridor smelled faintly of oil and hot metal, lit only by the occasional flicker of a faulty light panel. Ayara moved silently. Behind him, her steps so light they made no sound. It was like she had done this before, like she was used to escaping unseen. Daniel kept his weapon ready, eyes scanning every doorway and vent. Every corner felt like an ambush waiting to happen. They passed through a service lift and into a cargo bay. Crates were stacked high, marked with alien symbols Daniel did not recognize. He pushed one aside to make a small hiding space, motioning for Ayara to crouch. They waited there, the sound of distant footsteps echoing through the bay. Daniel's cum buzzed. A short encrypted ping. "Contact delayed. Keep her safe," was all it said. Delay made things worse. The longer they stayed on the station, the more people would know where they were. Daniel's instincts told him this mission was about to get far more complicated than a simple guard job. Ayara's calm face gave nothing away, but every now and then, he caught her glancing toward the bay doors, as if expecting someone or something to arrive, and in that moment, Daniel realized he was in the middle of something much bigger than he had been told. The question was, would he survive long enough to find out what it was? The first threat, the cargo bay, was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against the ears and made every small sound feel dangerous. Daniel crouched behind the crates, listening, his hand steady on the grip of his sidearm. Ayara knelt beside him, her gaze fixed on the shadows beyond. The bay doors, she didn't look afraid, but Daniel could feel her tension, like a storm waiting to break. A faint metallic scrape echoed from the far side of the bay. Daniel froze, every muscle locked. Someone was out there, moving slow, careful, trying not to be heard. But to a trained soldier like him, the sound was as loud as a shout. He glanced at Ayara and signaled for silence, her head tilted slightly, as if she was listening to something beyond his hearing. Then she whispered, "3 of them, armed, 1 is close, 2 are by the door." Daniel stared at her. There was no way she could know that unless she had some kind of enhanced senses. It was a detail he stored away for later. The first figure appeared between the stacks of crates, tall, wrapped in a dark coat, a mask hiding most of his face. Daniel moved like lightning, rising from cover and striking with the butt of his gun. The man crumpled to the ground without a sound. Ayara's eyes flickered toward the bay doors. "They heard that," she murmured. The heavy clang of boots on metal grew louder. Daniel grabbed Ayara's hand and pulled her toward the surface. Ladder at the far wall. They climbed fast, the metal rungs vibrating under their weight. Below, 2 more figures rushed in, weapons drawn, scanning the space where they had been hiding seconds before. From the upper walkway, Daniel led her into a narrow ventilation shaft. It was cramped and dusty, the smell of burnt wiring lingering. In the air, they crawled forward, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Ayara moved easily, like she had done this before. When Daniel slowed to check the route, she leaned close and whispered, "They're not bounty hunters." He frowned. "Then who are they?" "People who want the truth buried," she said simply. The shaft ended in a grate overlooking the station's lower concourse. The space below was alive with movement. Traders shouting, droids hauling goods, travelers rushing between platforms. It was the perfect place to disappear in the crowd, but also the perfect place for an ambush. Daniel removed the grate carefully and helped Ayara down. She blended into the flow of people instantly, her robes glowing threads catching the light. Like something magical, for a moment, Daniel almost forgot the danger. Then he saw them. 2 figures moving against the flow of the crowd, their eyes locked on Ayara. Daniel's hand went to his weapon. But firing in a public space would cause chaos and draw more enemies. Instead, he moved quickly to intercept them. When the first one reached for her, Daniel grabbed his wrist and twisted hard. Forcing him to the ground, the second attacker swung. A short blade. Daniel sidestepped, catching the man's arm and slamming him into a vendor's stall, sending fruit scattering across the floor. Ayara didn't scream or panic. She stepped aside smoothly, her hands hidden in her sleeves. When Daniel looked back, he caught a brief glint of metal in her hand before she tucked it away again. The attackers were down, but Daniel knew they wouldn't be the last. "We have to move," he said, guiding her toward the maglev tram entrance. They boarded just as the doors closed. The tram's window showed the station sliding past, a blur of lights, metal, and shadows. Daniel kept watch while Ayara sat calmly, as if they were simply traveling somewhere peaceful. "You're not afraid," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment, then replied, "Fear wastes time." It was an answer that told him nothing and everything at the same time. Halfway to their stop, the tram slowed unexpectedly. Daniel's instincts screamed that this was wrong. Through the window, He saw security officers stepping onto the platform ahead, but their armor wasn't station standard. It was darker, heavier, built for combat. Ayara met his eyes and said, "They're here for me." Daniel stood, readying himself. This time, he knew they weren't just going to try to take her. They were going to kill her, and anyone who got in their way. The hidden truth: the tram lurched to a stop, the lights flickering for a moment before settling into a dim red glow. Daniel's eyes swept the carriage, every sense alert. Outside the window, the dark armored security officers spread out, their weapons held low but ready. Passengers began to murmur, some pulling away, others clutching their bags tight, sensing something was wrong. Ayara did not move, her calm face unchanged. Daniel leaned toward her, speaking low. "We need another way out." She glanced toward the maintenance hatch at the rear of the tram, the faintest nod telling him she had already seen it. As the first officer stepped onto the tram, Daniel moved fast, pulling Ayara by the hand and slipping through the narrow aisle toward the hatch. He kicked it open, and the two dropped into the maintenance crawlspace below the tram. The air was hot and thick with the smell of burnt dust. Metal echoed under their boots as they hurried along the narrow passage. Above them, muffled voices called out, the sound of boots pounding on the tram floor. They reached a service ladder and climbed, emerging into an unused cargo platform. It was dark here, lit only by a single overhead strip that flickered weakly. Ayara paused, looking around, then finally spoke. "Daniel, there is something you must know." Her voice was softer now, almost reluctant, as if she weighed every word before letting it out. "I am not just a geisha," she said, meeting his eyes. Daniel almost laughed. He had guessed that much after the attacks, but she continued, "I am the last courier of the Mariah Cord." The name meant nothing to Daniel, but the way she said it made it sound important. She reached inside her robe and produced a small crystal capsule, no bigger than his thumb, glowing faintly blue. "This carries the memory of a war," she said. "Proof of crimes committed by the syndicate and certain human officials who sold entire colonies into slavery." Daniel stared at the capsule, his jaw tight. He had fought in wars, seen corruption. But this was something different. Ayara went on. "If this reaches the right hands, the syndicate will fall, and the human worlds will be free of their influence." Daniel understood now why so many were after her, and why they would kill without hesitation. "This buyer," he said. "They're part of this resistance." She nodded. "But they are late. And that means they may already be compromised." A sudden noise cut through their conversation, the sound of metal being pried open. They turned to see one of the platform's side doors bending under pressure. Daniel grabbed Ayara's arm. "We're leaving." They ran toward the far end of the platform, Daniel scanning for an exit. A maintenance stairwell led upward toward the outer levels of the station. As they climbed, Ayara spoke again, her breath quick but steady. "Daniel, you must understand. If I fall, you must take this crystal and run." He shook his head. "Not happening." "It is not about me," she insisted. "It is about the millions who will live or die because of what is inside." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't just guarding her now. He was holding the future of entire worlds in his hands. They burst through the stairwell door into a massive observation deck. Through the huge glass panels, the void of space stretched out, dotted with the lights of ships drifting between docking ports. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful, but the reflection in the glass showed dark armored figures stepping onto the deck behind them. Daniel spun, firing 2 quick shots, forcing the attackers to take cover. Ayara dropped behind a low bench, clutching the crystal close to her chest. Daniel moved between cover points, exchanging fire with the attackers. The air smelled of ozone from the energy blasts, the glass panels shuddering with each impact. One shot grazed his arm, burning through the sleeve of his coat. He gritted his teeth and fired back, dropping one of the soldiers. The others began to advance, their heavy boots thudding on the deck. Ayara's voice called out over the noise. "There's an emergency dock on the far side." Daniel nodded. laying down covering fire as they moved. They reached the hatch to the dock and slammed it shut behind them. Sealing it with the manual lock, the room beyond was small, with a single sleek shuttle resting on its pad. Daniel climbed into the cockpit. Powering up the systems, Ayara sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the viewport. "This is only the beginning," she said quietly. "Now that you know the truth, you cannot turn back." Daniel didn't answer. The engines roared to life, the deck lights flashing red as the shuttle lifted from the pad. Somewhere deep in his chest, he knew she was right. Fate had already shifted, and there was no going back. The chase across the station, the shuttle's engines roared. But before Daniel could guide it away from the dock, a sharp alarm filled the cockpit. The station's docking clamps had locked onto the shuttle, holding it in place like an iron fist. Through the viewport, Daniel saw shadows moving along the docking arm, syndicate soldiers in black armor, armed and moving with military precision. "They're already here," Daniel muttered, switching the engines to standby. Ayara's voice was calm but urgent. "We can't fight them from here. We need to disappear into the station." Daniel powered the shuttle down and opened the side hatch, the two slipping into the narrow maintenance corridor that ran along the docking ring. The air smelled faintly of coolant, and the walls hummed with the vibration of nearby systems. They moved quickly, Daniel in front, Ayara close behind. Every sound, the creak of a pipe, the hiss of steam, felt like a warning. He knew they had seconds before the syndicate realized the shuttle was empty. At the end of the corridor, they entered a busy service hub. Droids rolled past carrying crates. Workers shouted to one another over the noise. Daniel spotted a maglev platform on the far side, a way to reach the central levels of the station. But as they crossed, a voice barked over the intercom, "Security alert. 2 targets on the run." Sector 5, heads turned, and then the crowd shifted. Some tried to get away from the danger, but others, the syndicate's eyes in the station, began moving toward them. Daniel grabbed Ayara's arm and plunged into a maze of stacked cargo containers. The air was warmer here, heavy with the smell of oil and metal. Shouts echoed behind them, boots pounding on the metal floor. Daniel's heart raced, his mind working through the station's layout. He needed a path that wasn't on any public map. Ayara suddenly touched his arm, pointing to a narrow hatch hidden behind a row of coolant tanks. Without a word, she slipped through, and Daniel followed. The hatch led into a service tunnel no wider than his shoulders, the air stale and thick with dust. The sound of pursuit grew faint here, replaced by the distant hum of machinery. "Do you know where this goes?" he asked. Ayara nodded. "The undermarkets. They won't risk a full strike there." Minutes later, they emerged into a completely different world. The undermarkets were alive with color and chaos. Stalls packed into tight alleys, lights flickering in a dozen shades, music and alien chatter filling the air, the smell of spices, engine grease, and street food mixed into something both strange and familiar. Daniel pulled Ayara's hood low, guiding her through the crowd here. Anonymity was possible, but it wouldn't last if the syndicate sent trackers. As they passed a weapons stall, the owner, an old reptilian merchant with gold eyes, leaned forward and hissed, "They're hunting you, human. And the one you guard." Daniel didn't slow, but his grip on Ayara tightened. The words followed them like smoke. Everywhere he looked, it felt like eyes were watching, some curious, some calculating. They cut through a narrow alley between 2 food vendors. Behind them, movement, 3 figures in black armor pushing through the crowd. Daniel swore under his breath and picked up the pace. The alley opened into a wide platform that overlooked the station's reactor core. Bright light from the energy conduits washed the space in a harsh blue glow. The hum of power filled the air, vibrating in his bones. Daniel spotted an old maintenance tram at the far end. It was half buried in scrap, its metal shell rusted, but its power light still glowed faintly. "That's our way out," he said. They sprinted for it, the syndicate soldiers breaking into a run behind them. Energy bolts sizzled past, striking the walls and sending sparks into the air. Daniel shoved Ayara into the tram's cabin and slammed the control lever forward. The old machine groaned but began to move, rattling along its track. The platform behind them shrank as the tram picked up speed. Ayara glanced back, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "They will hunt us until one of us is dead." Daniel met her gaze, and for the first time, he realized she wasn't speaking in fear. She was speaking in certainty. This wasn't just a chase. It was the beginning of a war neither of them could walk away from. The Betrayal, the maintenance tram rattled and shook as it sped along the dimly lit track. Old metal joints groaned, and sparks danced where the rails met the worn wheels. Daniel kept his eyes ahead, gripping the control lever, while Ayara sat silently beside him, her hands folded over the crystal hidden within her robe. Neither spoke for several minutes, the sound of the tram echoing through the empty tunnel. Finally, the darkness gave way to faint light, the glow of the tram station at the edge of the neutral zone. Daniel slowed the tram and guided it into the docking platform. Waiting there was a lone figure dressed in plain gray travel robes. The man's face was kind, his posture relaxed, and he raised both hands in greeting as they stepped off the tram. "Daniel Cross," the man said warmly. "Ayara, I'm so relieved you made it." Ayara's eyes softened, a small smile touching her lips. "This is Catherine, our contact." Daniel scanned the station's quiet surroundings. The air here was cooler, smelling faintly of old stone and metal polish. There were no syndicate soldiers in sight, no signs of pursuit. For the first time in hours, Daniel let himself relax just slightly. Catherine gestured toward a small side passage. "Come, there's a safe room nearby." The three of them moved through narrow corridors lined with storage lockers. Daniel kept glancing over his shoulder, but the place was empty. Finally, Catherine stopped before a steel door, pressed a code into the keypad, and stepped aside for them to enter. Inside was a simple chamber, a table, a few chairs, and a single overhead light casting a soft yellow glow. Ayara sat down, her expression one of quiet relief. Daniel took the seat across from her, still keeping one hand close to his sidearm. Catherine closed the door gently, then turned back toward them, and that's when Daniel saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the slight twitch of his mouth. A soldier's cell. Before Daniel could speak, Catherine's voice changed, colder, sharper. "You've done well, Sergeant," he said. "You've brought her right to me." Ayara's head snapped up, shock flashing in her gaze. Daniel rose instantly, his weapon drawn. Catherine didn't flinch. "You think you can protect her forever?" he said, stepping forward slowly. "The syndicate has already paid for her delivery. And for your silence." From the corner of the room, a hidden panel slid open, and two syndicate soldiers in black armor stepped out, weapons aimed. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger, but Catherine raised a hand. "Easy now, Sergeant," he said. "You're a practical man. Walk away, and you live." Daniel didn't move. Ayara's voice was steady but low. "You were with the Resistance." Catherine's smile was bitter. "The Resistance doesn't win wars. The Syndicate does, and I prefer to be on the side that survives." The soldiers moved closer. Daniel shifted, placing himself between them and Ayara. The crystal was still in her hands beneath the table, hidden from view. Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Give it to me, and I might let you both walk out." Ayara didn't answer, her gaze locked on Daniel's. In that silent moment, he understood. She trusted him to make the call. Daniel exhaled slowly, then suddenly kicked the table toward the soldiers. The crash sent them stumbling back, and Daniel fired twice, hitting one in the chest plate. The room exploded into chaos, blaster fire, the smell of ozone, shouts echoing against the walls. Ayara darted to the side, moving with impossible speed, slipping past Catherine toward the door. Daniel fought to keep the remaining soldier pinned down, his heart pounding in his ears. Catherine reached for Ayara, but she twisted away, her sleeve flashing with a hidden blade. A sharp cry rang out as Catherine clutched his arm. Daniel fired again, forcing the soldier to retreat toward the panel they'd entered from. Ayara grabbed Daniel's hand, pulling him toward the corridor outside. They ran, the sound of Catherine's voice chasing them. "You can't run forever. We own every shadow on this station." The corridor stretched before them, dim and narrow. Every step carried them farther from the false safety they believed in. Daniel's mind burned with anger, not just at Catherine, but at himself for letting his guard down. Ayara's voice cut through his thoughts. "He will follow. And next time, he won't come alone." Daniel nodded grimly. "Then we make sure next time never comes." The final stand, the narrow corridor twisted and turned. Every shadow feeling like it could hide a syndicate assassin. Daniel and Ayara ran without slowing, their footsteps echoing against the metal walls behind them. Faint shouts and the heavy pounding of boots told them Catherine's soldiers were already on the hunt. Daniel's jaw tightened. This wasn't just escape anymore. This was the moment they would have to stand and fight. They burst into an old cargo transfer bay, long abandoned, its floor littered with broken crates and rusted equipment. The massive blast doors at the far end were half open, revealing the black expanse of space beyond and the faint glow of the planet far below. Daniel scanned the bay quickly. High catwalks, loose cables, a power console in the corner. He had learned to turn battlefields into weapons, and this place was full of opportunities. "Ayara," he said, pointing toward the shadows under the catwalk. "Hide there and don't move until I tell you." She didn't argue, only slipped into the dark like she was part of it. Daniel moved fast, pulling loose metal panels and stacking them into crude cover. He dragged a heavy crate into place, giving himself a solid firing position. His pulse was steady now, the calm that always came before the storm. The first syndicate soldiers entered moments later, black armor gleaming in the dim light. Daniel opened fire immediately, forcing them to scatter behind crates and broken machinery. Blaster fire lit the bay in flashes, the smell of ozone thick in the air. The noise was deafening, metal screaming as bolts punched through walls and shattered debris. Daniel ducked low and triggered the power console. Sparks rained down as emergency shutters slammed shut across the side doors, sealing the soldiers inside with him. They wanted the fight. Now they would get it. From her hiding place, Ayara watched silently, her eyes sharp and calculating. More soldiers poured in, and Daniel switched positions, never staying in one spot long enough to be targeted. He fired short, controlled bursts, each shot forcing the enemy back a step. But for every one he dropped, two more took their place. A flash grenade clattered across the floor. Daniel dove behind a crate as it exploded in a burst of white light and deafening sound. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Catherine's voice, cold and confident. "End this. Take them alive if you can, but I won't cry if you can't." Daniel gritted his teeth and pulled a small device from his belt, a compact explosive meant for sealing breaches. He set the timer and slid it across the floor toward a stack of crates where 3 soldiers were taking cover. The blast ripped through the bay, throwing them into the air and tearing a gap in the floor. Below, the deep emptiness of space yawned. A sudden movement caught Daniel's eye, a soldier slipping around his flank toward Ayara's position. Daniel shouted a warning, but Ayara was already moving. She stepped from the shadows, her hidden blade flashing. The soldier collapsed silently, and she vanished back into cover for the first time. Daniel realized she wasn't just a passenger in this fight. She was dangerous in her own way. The syndicate forces began to push harder, trying to box him in. Daniel grabbed a loose cable hanging from the catwalk and yanked it free. It sparked violently, and he tossed it onto the wet coolant pooling near the soldier's feet. The flash of electricity lit the bay like lightning, dropping 2 instantly and forcing the rest back. Catherine stepped through the smoke, blaster in hand, his eyes locked on Daniel. "You could have been rich, Sergeant," he said. "You could have walked away." Daniel aimed his weapon. "I don't walk away from the people I'm protecting." They fired at the same time, the shots slamming into cover and ricocheting. Off metal beams, Ayara slipped from her hiding spot. Moving toward the blast doors, Daniel covered her, laying down fire to keep the soldiers pinned. She reached the control panel and hit the manual release. With a deep groan, the doors began to close, sealing off the bay from the docking arm. Daniel sprinted toward her as the last gap narrowed, sliding through just before it sealed completely. The sound of pounding fists and muffled shouts echoed. On the other side, Daniel and Ayara stood in the dimly lit corridor beyond. Breathing hard, for a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ayara held out the crystal to him, her voice steady. "This isn't just my mission anymore. It's ours." Daniel took it, feeling its faint hum in his palm. In that instant, he knew, whatever came next, this was the line they couldn't retreat from. Fate changed everything. The corridor ahead was quiet, the hum of the station's power systems the only sound. Daniel and Ayara moved quickly, their footsteps soft against the metal floor. The crystal felt heavy in Daniel's hand, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. One small object, holding the power to destroy the Syndicate, or plunge entire worlds into chaos. They reached a maintenance lift, the doors opening with a tired hiss. Inside, the space was cramped, the smell of old grease lingering in the air. Daniel pressed the control for the upper docking ring. As the lift began to rise, Ayara's gaze stayed fixed on the floor, her voice quiet. "Everything changes once this leaves the station." Daniel nodded. "Yeah." For both of us, the lift stopped with a shudder, the doors sliding open to reveal the glow of the upper docks. The air here was cooler, cleaner, carrying the faint scent of ozone from the shielded airlocks. Rows of ships waited, some small and sleek, others massive cargo haulers with hulls scarred from years of service. But Daniel's focus narrowed to one, a small courier craft with human registry markings. Its hull gleamed silver under the dock lights, and its engines were already powered up. A figure stood at the ramp, a woman in a plain black flight suit. Her posture was tense, her hand resting near the blaster on her hip. "Are you the buyer?" Daniel called out, his voice steady but sharp. The woman's eyes flipped to Ayara, then to the crystal in Daniel's hand. "I'm the pilot," she said. "Your buyer's waiting in deep space. But if we don't leave now, none of us will get there." It sounded right. But after Catherine's betrayal, Daniel trusted nothing. He glanced at Ayara, who gave the smallest nod, a silent agreement that they'd take the risk. They moved toward the ramp, the faint hum of the courier's engines vibrating through the deck. Then, from the far side of the dock, shouts erupted. Syndicate soldiers poured in, their black armor catching the light. Blasters raised, Daniel grabbed Ayara's arm and pushed her up the ramp, turning to fire at the advancing soldiers. Bolts of blue energy slammed into the deck around him, the heat searing the air. The pilot shouted from the cockpit, "Get in or you're both dead." Daniel dove inside as the ramp closed, the ship's engines roaring to full power. The courier blasted away from the dock, streaking into the dark void. Through the viewport, Daniel saw the station shrinking behind them, lights flashing as Syndicate patrol craft launched in pursuit. The pilot twisted the controls, sending the ship weaving through the traffic of departing freighters and incoming shuttles. The blackness of space became a blur of motion, stars stretching. As the courier dove toward the edge of the system, Ayara stood beside Daniel, her eyes on the stars ahead. Her voice was calm, almost serene. "You didn't have to come this far for me." Daniel shook his head. "It stopped being about you the moment I saw what was in that crystal." For a moment, she simply looked at him, as if measuring the weight of his words. Then she smiled, the faintest curve of her lips. Then maybe fate chose the right man. An alarm blared in the cockpit, the pilot calling back. "We've got 2 Syndicate interceptors closing fast." Daniel moved to the weapons console, his hands running over the unfamiliar controls. "Point me at them," he said. "I'll keep them busy." The pilot grinned without looking back. "My kind of passenger." The first interceptor appeared on the display, sleek and black, Its weapons lighting up the darkness, Daniel fired. The ship's cannons roaring as bright streaks of energy tore through the void. One shot connected, the interceptor spinning out in a burst of flame. The second ship swung wide, trying to flank them. Ayara leaned over the console, her fingers moving with surprising skill to reroute power to the forward shields. The next volley slammed into them, but didn't break through with a sharp turn. The pilot lined up the second target. Daniel's shot struck true, the interceptor erupting into a burning cloud of debris. The sudden silence after the battle was almost startling. The pilot's voice came softer now. "We're clear." Setting course for the rendezvous point, Daniel leaned back in his seat, the adrenaline fading. Ayara stood at the viewport, the crystal glowing faintly in her hands. Her voice was quiet but certain. "Everything is different now. We can't go back." Daniel looked out at the stars, their cold light reflecting in his eyes. "No," he said. "We go forward. And we finish this." The courier ship slipped into the darkness, leaving the Syndicate's reach behind. But in Daniel's mind, he knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far bigger, and fate had already chosen its path.